The notebook fell open when Emma Richardson was grading papers after school, revealing something that made her heart skip a beat. Sarah, one of her quietest students, had written detailed predictions about news events for the next 3 days: a political scandal, a celebrity announcement, and a natural disaster. Emma checked the dates. These entries were written a week ago, and according to the morning news, every single prediction had already come true. What Emma discovered next would challenge everything she thought she knew about teenage intuition, classroom dynamics, and the nature of time itself. Emma Richardson had always prided herself on being the kind of history teacher who made the past feel alive for her students. At 34, she'd been teaching at Lincoln High School for 12 years, developing a reputation for creating engaging lessons that connected historical events to current affairs. Her approach was unconventional but effective. Instead of just memorizing dates and names, Emma encouraged her students to think critically about patterns in history, to discuss how past events might relate to contemporary issues, and to express their thoughts freely during classroom discussions. Room 237 had become a space where students felt comfortable sharing ideas, making connections, and even speculating about current events. Emma fostered an environment where wrong answers were learning opportunities, and where students could explore their thoughts without judgment. Her advanced placement world history class was particularly dynamic. 22 bright, articulate teenagers who came from diverse backgrounds and brought different perspectives to their discussions. Emma had taught many of these students since their sophomore year, watching them develop their analytical skills and historical thinking. What made her classroom special was the level of trust and open communication she'd built with her students. They felt safe to express unconventional ideas, challenge assumptions, and engage in the kind of free-flowing discussion that Emma believed was essential for deep learning. But over the past month, those free-flowing discussions had taken on an eerie quality that Emma couldn't ignore. It started with small things that Emma initially dismissed as coincidence. During a lesson about economic cycles in October, Jake mentioned casually that the stock market's going to have a weird day tomorrow, like everything will go up except tech stocks. The next day, that's exactly what happened. When they were studying World War II propaganda techniques, Madison observed that someone famous is probably going to say something really controversial about veterans this week that everyone will get mad about. 3 days later, a major celebrity sparked national outrage with comments about military service. During a discussion about natural disasters in history, Quiet Sarah had mentioned that there's going to be flooding somewhere unexpected this weekend, like in a desert place. That Sunday, flash floods hit Phoenix, Arizona. At first, Emma attributed these accurate predictions to her students' awareness of current events and their ability to recognize patterns, exactly the kind of critical thinking she was trying to develop. Teenagers today had access to so much information through social media and news apps that it seemed plausible they might pick up on subtle indicators that adults missed. But as the predictions became more specific and consistently accurate, Emma began to feel unsettled. The breakthrough came when she was grading papers after a particularly engaging class discussion about the unpredictability of historical events. Sarah's notebook had fallen open to a page of personal writing that students sometimes included alongside their formal assignments. What Emma saw made her question her own sanity. Sarah's notebook contained a detailed list of predictions, written in her careful handwriting and dated from the previous week. Monday, Senator Williams will announce retirement due to family scandal involving campaign funds. Tuesday, Taylor Swift will surprise release a song about her grandmother's wedding dress. Wednesday, 5.2 earthquake will hit Northern California, damaging 3 buildings in downtown San Rafael, but no injuries. Emma's hands trembled as she checked each prediction against the news from that week. Every single one had been accurate, not just generally correct, but precise in details that seemed impossible for a 17-year-old to know in advance. But what truly shocked Emma was the realization that Sarah wasn't the only one. As she began paying closer attention to her students' casual comments during class discussions, she noticed that several of them were making remarkably accurate predictions about future events. It wasn't just current events they seemed to anticipate. Emma's students were somehow predicting specific news stories, celebrity announcements, weather events, and even minor local incidents with an accuracy that defied explanation. Emma found herself in the strange position of documenting her own students' predictions to see if the pattern would continue. She started keeping a private journal, recording the date and exact wording of their casual comments during class discussions. The results were impossible to dismiss. Her students were consistently predicting future events with an accuracy rate that was statistically impossible. Emma knew she needed to approach this mystery systematically. As a history teacher, she was trained to analyze evidence, consider multiple explanations, and avoid jumping to supernatural conclusions. There had to be a rational explanation for what she was observing. Her first hypothesis was that her students had access to inside information somehow. Perhaps they were picking up rumors from social media, or their parents worked in industries that gave them advanced knowledge of certain announcements. But when Emma discreetly researched her students' family backgrounds, she found nothing that would explain their predictive accuracy. Their parents worked in typical middle-class professions: teachers, nurses, small business owners, accountants. None had connections to media, entertainment, politics, or other industries that might provide advance information. Emma's second theory was that her students were unconsciously picking up on subtle patterns in news cycles and social media trends that allowed them to make educated guesses that seemed prophetic. This seemed more plausible. Teenagers were incredibly adept at reading digital environments and social cues. To test this theory, Emma began asking her students to explain their reasoning behind their predictions. But when she pressed them for details, they seemed genuinely puzzled by their own accuracy. "I don't know why I said that," Jake admitted when Emma asked him about his stock market prediction. "It just felt like that's what was going to happen." "It's like when you have a word on the tip of your tongue," Madison explained, "except it's tomorrow's news on the tip of your tongue." The students seemed as surprised by their predictive accuracy as Emma was, which ruled out any deliberate deception or inside knowledge. As Emma continued documenting her students' predictions, she began to notice more complex patterns that deepened the mystery rather than solving it.
First, the predictions only seemed to work for events that would occur within the next 24-48 hours. Her students couldn't predict events a week in advance with the same accuracy. Second, the predictions were most accurate when they emerged spontaneously during class discussions about historical events. When Emma tried to directly ask students to predict future events, their accuracy dropped significantly. Third, the phenomenon seemed to be contagious in some way. Students who hadn't initially shown predictive abilities began making accurate predictions after several weeks in the class environment. Most puzzling of all, Emma realized that her students' predictions were somehow connected to the historical content they were studying. When they discussed economic crashes, students predicted market fluctuations. When they studied natural disasters, students anticipated weather events. When they examined political upheavals, students foresaw political scandals. It was as if studying historical patterns was somehow activating their ability to recognize similar patterns about to unfold in the present. Emma decided she needed outside perspective on what she was observing. She reached out to Dr. Michael Chen, a professor of cognitive psychology at the nearby university who specialized in pattern recognition and intuitive decision-making. "Dr. Chen," Emma explained during their coffee meeting, "I have students who seem to be predicting future events with impossible accuracy. I've documented dozens of examples over the past month." Dr. Chen listened thoughtfully as Emma presented her evidence. Detailed records of predictions, verification of their accuracy, and analysis of the patterns she'd observed. "What you're describing could have several explanations," Dr. Chen said finally. "The most likely is that your students are demonstrating an enhanced form of pattern recognition. When humans study historical patterns intensively, they can develop an intuitive sense for how similar patterns might unfold." "But they're predicting specific details," Emma protested, "not just general trends." "That's more unusual," Dr. Chen admitted. There are documented cases of groups developing collective intuitive abilities, particularly in environments that encourage free association and creative thinking. Your classroom environment might be creating optimal conditions for this kind of phenomenon. Dr. Chen proposed conducting a formal study of Emma's students with proper controls and documentation. Emma agreed, hoping that scientific methodology might provide answers to what she was experiencing.
With parental permission and ethical oversight from the university, Dr. Chen designed a study to test Emma's students' predictive abilities under controlled conditions. The experiment was simple. Students would be presented with historical scenarios and asked to discuss how similar events might unfold in the contemporary world. Their discussions would be recorded and analyzed for any statements that could be verified against future events. To maintain the natural classroom environment that seemed essential to the phenomenon, the experiment was conducted during regular class time and presented as an extension of their normal historical analysis work. The results exceeded even Emma's expectations. During a discussion about the 1929 stock market crash, students made specific predictions about market movements for the following week that proved 89% accurate. When analyzing the fall of the Berlin Wall, they predicted 3 separate international political developments that occurred within days. Most remarkably, during a lesson about the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, Sarah mentioned that something's going to happen with bridges this week. Not an earthquake, but something that makes people think about infrastructure. 3 days later, a major bridge in Seattle was temporarily closed due to structural concerns discovered during routine inspection. Dr. Chen was fascinated, but cautious. "What we're observing is statistically significant," he told Emma, "but we need to understand the mechanism. Are your students accessing information through conventional means, or is something more unusual happening?" The answer came from an unexpected source: the students themselves. During one of Dr. Chen's observation sessions, Madison raised her hand with a question that changed everything. "Miss Richardson, have you noticed that we're all having really vivid dreams lately? Like dreams about news stories?" Emma felt a chill of recognition. She'd been having unusually vivid dreams recently too, dreams that often featured scenarios similar to events that occurred the next day. As the class discussed their dream experiences, a pattern emerged. Students were reporting dreams that contained elements of future news events, not exact predictions, but symbolic or metaphorical representations that their conscious minds somehow translated into accurate forecasts. "It's like our brains are processing information while we sleep," Jake explained. "Then during class, when we're relaxed and talking about history, these insights just bubble up." Dr. Chen was intrigued. "What you're describing sounds like enhanced pattern recognition occurring during REM sleep, with the insights being accessed during states of relaxed attention. Your classroom environment might be creating optimal conditions for this process." But Sarah raised a question that haunted Emma. What if we're not predicting the future? What if studying all these historical patterns is somehow influencing what happens next? As Emma grappled with the implications of her students' abilities, she faced growing ethical concerns. If her students could genuinely predict future events, did she have a responsibility to act on that information? Should she warn people about predicted disasters? Should she report predicted crimes to authorities? The situation became more complex when her students began predicting personal events in their own lives and the lives of their classmates. Madison accurately predicted that her parents would announce their divorce before the family had even had the discussion. Jake foresaw his acceptance to a college he'd barely considered applying to. Emma realized she was dealing with something that could fundamentally alter her students' lives, and potentially the lives of many others. During a particularly intense class discussion about the responsibility of historical witnesses, Emma decided to address the situation directly. "I want to talk about something that's been happening in our class," she began, watching her students' faces carefully. "You've all been making remarkably accurate predictions about future events. Do you think we should discuss what this means and how we should handle it?" The response was immediate and unanimous. Her students had all been aware of what was happening, and had been waiting for her to acknowledge it. "We've been talking about it outside of class," Madison admitted. "We know it's weird, but we also know you've been documenting it." "Are we in trouble?" Sarah asked quietly. "You're not in trouble," Emma assured them, "but I think we need to talk about what's happening and what our responsibilities might be." What followed was the most important class discussion of Emma's teaching career. Her students grappled with questions about prediction, responsibility, and the nature of knowledge itself. Some students felt they should use their abilities to help people, warning about disasters, predicting positive events that could bring joy. Others worried about the burden of knowing things before they happened, and the potential consequences of interfering with natural events. Jake raised a crucial point. What if we're wrong sometimes? What if we warn someone about something bad and they change their plans, but then something worse happens because they change their plans? The discussion revealed the ethical complexity of predictive knowledge and the weight of responsibility that came with seemingly supernatural abilities. Emma found herself in the role of guide, rather than teacher, helping her students think through the implications of their experiences, rather than providing definitive answers. By the end of the discussion, the class had reached a consensus. They would continue documenting their predictions for Dr. Chen's research, but they would be very careful about acting on information about serious events. For minor predictions, they would simply observe and learn. For anything involving potential harm to others, they would consider appropriate ways to share information with adults who could take action. Over the following months, Emma's class became the subject of intensive but discreet research by Dr. Chen and his colleagues. The students' predictive abilities continued, though with varying accuracy depending on the type of event and the conditions under which predictions were made. The research revealed several important findings. The phenomenon seemed to be enhanced by the specific environment Emma had created in her classroom, a combination of historical pattern study, open discussion, relaxed attention, and group trust that created optimal conditions for intuitive pattern recognition. The students' abilities were strongest when predicting events related to the historical topics they were studying, suggesting that intensive pattern analysis was somehow activating predictive capabilities. The accuracy of predictions correlated with the students' emotional state and level of classroom engagement, indicating that the phenomenon required both cognitive and emotional components. Most significantly, the research suggested that the students weren't actually predicting the future in a supernatural sense, but rather accessing an enhanced form of pattern recognition that allowed them to unconsciously process vast amounts of subtle information and identify emerging trends before they became obvious. Dr. Chen's final report proposed that Emma's students had developed what he termed collective intuitive intelligence, an enhanced ability to recognize patterns and anticipate outcomes that emerged from their intensive study of historical cycles, combined with an optimal learning environment. "What your students are experiencing," Dr. Chen explained to Emma, "is likely an extreme example of what happens when human pattern recognition abilities are highly developed and supported by group dynamics. They're not seeing the future, they're seeing the present with exceptional clarity." The phenomenon gradually became less dramatic as the semester progressed, though Emma's students retained enhanced analytical abilities and continued to demonstrate remarkable insight into current events and social trends. Emma realized that she had inadvertently created a learning environment that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in education, not through supernatural means, but through the power of deep pattern study, collaborative thinking, and the kind of trust that allows intuitive insights to emerge. Emma's teaching methods became the subject of educational research, with other teachers attempting to replicate the conditions that had led to her students' remarkable abilities. While no other class achieved quite the same level of predictive accuracy, many reported enhanced critical thinking, pattern recognition, and analytical abilities among their students. Emma continued teaching at Lincoln High School, but her approach evolved to incorporate the lessons she'd learned about the power of creating environments where students could access their intuitive intelligence alongside their analytical skills. Her students went on to distinguished careers in fields requiring pattern recognition and analytical thinking: data science, investigative journalism, financial analysis, and research. Several credited their experience in Emma's class with developing abilities that served them throughout their lives. But perhaps most importantly, Emma had learned something profound about the nature of education itself. That when students feel safe to express their thoughts freely, when they're encouraged to recognize patterns and make connections, and when they're studying content that reveals the deep structures of human experience, learning can become almost magical. 5 years later, Emma received an email from Sarah, now studying cognitive science at MIT. "Miss Richardson, I wanted you to know that researchers here are very interested in what happened in our history class. They're calling it an example of emergent collective intelligence. I'm writing my thesis on how educational environments can enhance intuitive pattern recognition. Thank you for creating a space where we could discover abilities we didn't know we had." Emma smiled as she read the email. She'd always known that education was about more than memorizing facts or passing tests. It was about helping students discover what they were capable of when given the right environment and encouragement. But she'd never imagined that studying the patterns of the past could somehow open windows into the patterns of the future. Her students hadn't actually predicted tomorrow's news. They'd learned to read today's reality with such clarity that tomorrow became visible. And perhaps that was the most valuable lesson of all. If this story intrigued you, remember that great teachers create environments where students can discover abilities they never knew they had. When we study patterns deeply enough, when we feel safe to share our insights, and when we work together to understand complex information, we can develop almost supernatural abilities to see connections and anticipate outcomes. Have you ever experienced a moment of intuitive insight that proved remarkably accurate? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes our minds are capable of processing more information than we consciously realize. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment and remember, the next time you're in a classroom or learning environment, you might be developing abilities that go far beyond what's in the textbooks.